December 1943. A cold wind crawls across the wire of a prisoner of war camp somewhere in occupied Europe, carrying the smell of frost, rust, and burnt firewood. The men inside the compound move slowly, wrapped in thin coats, their faces hollowed by months of monotony and rationed meals. Boots crunch over frozen mud as a pair of guards wheel in a wooden crate, its foreign markings sharp against the dull winter light. The prisoners gather, curious. Stenciled letters announce a name few of them have ever seen: Coca-Cola. Glass bottles, dark and glinting like small chemical vials, clink softly within the crate. Whispers spread. Is it medicine? Some kind of American tonic? Others wonder if it's a disinfectant sent for the infirmary. The liquid looks too dark, too rich to be ordinary food. A guard shrugs. He doesn't know either. He simply hands the bottles over. One prisoner lifts a bottle to the light, watching the bubbles cling and rise as if alive. He hesitates, then takes a small sip. The sharp sweetness strikes first, then the burn of carbonation he has never felt before. Around him, the men wait, uncertain what this strange American substance will do next. And in that waiting, a much larger story begins, one shaped by hunger, misunderstanding, and the vast machinery of a world at war. Winter had settled heavily over Europe by late 1943. The Second World War had dragged into its fourth relentless year, reshaping borders, economies, and the human experience of entire nations. Armies advanced and retreated across continents, but inside the barbed wire grids of POW camps, time seemed frozen. Men who had once marched with purpose now lived within a world reduced to routines: roll calls, ration lines, long silences, and the constant negotiation between despair and endurance. Captivity meant deprivation, not only of freedom, but of familiarity. Food was predictable in its scarcity. Medical supplies were thin, comforts were almost non-existent. A prisoner's world narrowed to the physical sensations of hunger, cold, and monotony. Anything unusual, a new object, a new sound, a new taste, instantly became a source of speculation. And in many camps, that speculation could bloom into myth. Across Europe, conditions varied dramatically from camp to camp. Some German-run facilities followed Geneva Convention guidelines with strict precision. Others struggled under shortages or indifferent administration. On the Eastern Front, the situation was far harsher. Soviet and German POWs endured conditions where survival itself felt extraordinary. Meanwhile, Allied-run camps in North Africa and the Pacific held Axis prisoners who were equally removed from the products, habits, and commercial culture of the West. Cultural isolation magnified confusion. Many POWs had never seen an American consumer product in their lives. In rural Europe, a brightly branded glass bottle was unusual enough. For Japanese or Southeast Asian prisoners, the appearance of a dark fizzy liquid from the United States might as well have been alchemy. Carbonation was unfamiliar. The sweetness seemed artificial. The label suggested a chemical formula more than a drink. Everything about Coca-Cola, its color, its fizz, its name, looked medicinal to men accustomed to tonics, herbal extracts, or bitter iron supplements. And then there was the question of how such items reached POW camps at all. Despite the chaos of war, supply chains continued to function through channels of humanitarian relief. Red Cross parcels, though inconsistent, became lifelines. They were assembled in faraway warehouses, packed with canned goods, chocolate, cigarettes, and occasionally unexpected items donated by civilian organizations or shipped in bulk by Allied governments. When these parcels were intercepted or redistributed by camp authorities, prisoners often received only fragments of their original contents. A few bottles of Coca-Cola might arrive not as a treat, but as an anomaly, a leftover from a shipment intended for hospitals, or a misdirected ration from an American depot. The Geneva Convention required that POWs receive medical care comparable to the captor's own troops, but medicine itself was scarce, especially by 1943. Real pharmaceuticals were tightly controlled, expensive, or nearly impossible to obtain. A bottle containing a dark liquid became an object of hope by default. Medicine could mean many things: a stimulant, a disinfectant, a tonic to restore strength. When men living on thin soups and coarse bread saw something rich and bottled with the density of syrup, they instinctively placed it in that category. Rumors traveled faster than facts inside the wire. A single assumption could ripple through dozens of men before evening roll call. Some believed Coca-Cola was an American energy supplement. Others thought it was designed to treat stomach illness, especially given its effervescence. A few believed it was far stronger, a concentrated chemical used to clean medical instruments, or a dark alcohol that had been diluted by guards for rationing. Yet the arrival of Coca-Cola in POW camps was more than a misunderstanding. It was a small window into the broader machinery of global war, a world in which nations mobilized not just armies but industries, factories, shipping lines, and marketing empires. Every object inside a prison compound carried the weight of the world outside, even a bottle of soda. This is where the story truly begins, with a global conflict producing unexpected encounters and with prisoners who interpreted each new arrival through the only lens they had: survival, rumor, and the fragments of knowledge that reached them through the wire. And to understand why Coca-Cola appeared in camps at all, the story must expand far beyond the fences and into the industrial heart of the Allied war effort. To understand how a bottle of Coca-Cola could cross oceans, battlefronts, and prison walls, we must return to the early 20th century, when the drink was still a curiosity beyond American borders. Before the war, Coca-Cola had only modest international presence, a few bottling plants in Europe, scattered distribution in Asia, and near mythical rarity everywhere else. It was not yet a universal symbol. In many regions, even well-traveled civilians had never seen one. But the expansion accelerated dramatically once the United States entered the war in December 1941. Military planners understood that weapons and vehicles required fuel, but soldiers required morale. The U.S. War Department moved quickly to secure both. In 1943, General Eisenhower signed a directive stating that every American in uniform should have access to a bottle of Coca-Cola wherever he served. It was not simply a drink, it was a reminder of home, a psychological anchor, a portable comfort in a world stripped of normality. Coca-Cola, in turn, aligned its industrial might with the American war machine. The company offered to provide equipment at cost, build bottling plants near combat zones, and ship syrup across dangerous sea routes so the beverage could be produced on location. Dozens of mobile bottling units were created, and permanent facilities were quickly established in the United Kingdom, North Africa, Australia, and eventually parts of liberated Europe. Each plant could produce tens of thousands of bottles a day. Civilians, soldiers, and local laborers were trained to operate assembly lines that ran almost without interruption. As these facilities opened, Coca-Cola followed the American advance. Every new depot, every airfield, every port became both a military asset and a distribution node for the beverage. For troops, especially those serving far from home, the bottle carried symbolic power. It represented abundance in a time of rationing, stability amid the disorder of war, and the vision of an America that remained untouched by invasion. But the reach of this distribution network extended beyond the intended audience. When supply chains stretched across continents, they produced byproducts: surplus stock, misrouted containers, damaged crates, and items repurposed when original deliveries became impossible. In some cases, the Army shared shipments with Allied units. In others, the Red Cross accepted donations of food and drink from American manufacturers, including Coca-Cola, to supplement care packages for POWs. Once inside the Red Cross system, items could travel remarkable distances. Parcels assembled in Detroit or Toronto might pass through neutral Switzerland before heading into occupied Europe. Not all contents survived intact. Guards sometimes removed items for their own use or rationed them differently, but now and then a bottle slipped through, intact, unfamiliar, and almost surreal within the bleak environment of captivity. For many POWs, that first sight of a Coca-Cola bottle was an encounter with an alien object. The dark color suggested a tonic. The carbonation, when shaken or exposed to cold, made it hiss like something volatile. The sweetness was unlike the restricted wartime diets dominated by starches and bitter substitutes. Even the branding, bright script curling across a glass surface, felt out of place among military rations usually marked with plain labels or stenciled codes. Accounts from liberated POWs include descriptions of men handling the bottles with caution, unsure whether they should be consumed or diluted. Others attempted to warm it, assuming it was a medicine meant to be taken like herbal remedies at home. A few even speculated that the drink was a stimulant issued to American soldiers to keep them awake in combat. The irony, of course, was that for many Americans, Coca-Cola was simple, everyday normalcy. But for prisoners who had never seen carbonation, the experience seemed almost chemical. Misunderstanding grew not from ignorance, but from the extraordinary conditions of wartime life. Scarcity shapes perception, and in an environment where true medicine was rare, anything that came in a clean bottle carried meaning. From the factories in the United States to the camps of Europe and Asia, Coca-Cola's journey reveals how global conflict produces unexpected intersections between culture, technology, and human deprivation. Those intersections become clearer when we examine the story from multiple angles: human, cultural, logistical, and psychological, each offering a new lens through which to understand why POWs believed this strange American liquid must be medicine. Life inside a POW camp distilled existence down to a handful of daily concerns: hunger, illness, exhaustion, and the constant search for meaning in a world narrowed to fences and routine. In such an environment, the arrival of anything unusual became an event. A new blanket, a bar of soap, a scrap of newspaper. Each disruption of monotony stirred emotions stronger than its practical value. For men living on thin rations and thinner hope, a bottle filled with dark liquid seemed almost miraculous. Human perception inside the wire was not shaped by curiosity alone, but by psychological survival. A prisoner's body, strained by inadequate calories and recurring sickness, sharpened its awareness of anything that might restore strength. Medicine, in particular, carried both practical and symbolic weight. Quinine, iodine, aspirin, these were as precious as food. When men saw a bottled substance with a color like concentrated syrup, they instinctively placed it in the category of health rather than indulgence. Their bodies needed healing, their minds searched for it. Coca-Cola's sweetness amplified the confusion. The shock of sugar hitting the tongue, so rare in captivity, triggered a physical response that felt therapeutic. For some, it brought a momentary warmth in the chest, reminiscent of tonics taken at home during childhood fevers. For others, the caffeine provided a small burst of clarity and alertness, reinforcing the belief that it must be medicinal. Even the fizz contributed. The gentle burn of carbonation resembled the sensation of certain digestive remedies. Human beings make meaning from sensation, especially under stress. Inside the camps, the bottle became less a drink and more a potential remedy, something sent, perhaps, by distant hands concerned for their suffering. The human angle reveals that this misunderstanding was not folly. It was a deeply human response born from deprivation, hope, and the instinct to find significance in the smallest fracture of routine. And yet, the misunderstanding deepened when cultural distance was added to physical hardship. To many POWs, Coca-Cola was not simply unknown. It was culturally unintelligible. What Americans saw as a familiar brand had no counterpart in the lives of men from rural Germany, Italy, Japan, the Balkans, or Southeast Asia. In their worlds, beverages were simple: water, beer, herbal infusions, broths, perhaps wine. Bottled, carbonated soft drinks were rare luxuries even before wartime shortages. In some nations, they barely existed. Thus, prisoners interpreted Coca-Cola through the lens of their own cultural frameworks. A dark drink meant one thing in Bavaria, another in Kyushu. Japanese soldiers, whose civilian markets contained almost no carbonated beverages before the war, often assumed the liquid was medicinal or ceremonial. European POWs sometimes compared it to dark tonics used by pharmacists, iron mixtures given for anemia or stomach ailments. Others linked it to the syrups and bitters that apothecaries sold in small labeled bottles. Branding, too, played a role. The cursive logo was decorative, elaborate, and unlike the plain utilitarian labels used on military rations. To some prisoners, it resembled the ornate lettering found on bottles of tinctures and extracts in pre-war pharmacies. The unfamiliarity of the English script added another layer of ambiguity. It looked scientific rather than culinary. Then there was the wartime environment itself. Within Axis societies, propaganda had long portrayed American consumer culture as decadent and excessive, a place of wasteful indulgence rather than necessity. Few imagined that U.S. soldiers drank Coca-Cola the way they drank water or coffee. When POWs encountered the bottle, they saw something rare because in their home countries, such a substance was rare, if it existed at all. Cultural distance ensured that a soft drink became a riddle. And this riddle only grew more complex when considered through the movement of goods in wartime. The path by which Coca-Cola entered POW camps was almost accidental, shaped by the sprawling, imperfect machinery of global logistics during total war. To supply millions of American soldiers scattered across continents, the U.S. military created a network capable of moving mass-produced goods with astonishing speed. Soda syrup, bottles, caps, machinery, all flowed along the same arteries that carried fuel, ammunition, and medical supplies. The result was abundance at the front lines and occasional overflow beyond them. Red Cross parcels often served as the bridge. Packed in North America, these parcels were designed to supplement POW diets with calorie-dense foods, hygiene supplies, and morale items like chocolate or cigarettes. When Coca-Cola, donated in bulk or added for convenience, found its way into these shipments, it entered a distribution system never meant to carry novelty beverages into the captivity of enemy soldiers. Yet the system lacked the precision to prevent it. In other cases, bottling plants near war zones produced more Coke than local depots could consume or ship forward. Surplus bottles might be shared with Allied units, stored in warehouses, or repurposed by administrators who valued utility over origin. A camp commandant seeking goodwill, or simply needing to provide something beyond standard rations, might allocate a small quantity of these surplus items to prisoners. Supply chains during war are rarely linear. They twist, overlap, and bleed into spaces where their presence seems improbable. Coca-Cola arrived in POW camps not by design, but by logistical momentum. Once there, it transformed from surplus cargo into a source of speculation, a symbol of possibilities unimagined. And these possibilities only grew more layered when viewed through additional angles: moral, psychological, and medical, each revealing another dimension of how prisoners interpreted the mysterious drink. Inside a prisoner of war camp, morale was a fragile, flickering thing. It rose and fell, not with grand events, but with the smallest irregularities. A letter arriving after months of silence, a guard in a generous mood, a rumor about the war's progress whispered through the barracks. Prisoners lived in a psychological landscape shaped not by control, but by reaction. When Coca-Cola appeared, its impact went far beyond taste. It represented something alien to the drab rhythm of camp life: novelty, surprise, a flash of a world outside the wire where abundance still existed. For Allied POWs familiar with the drink, seeing it inside a camp created shock bordering on disbelief. The bottle was a fragment of home, a reminder of street corners, baseball games, and peacetime routines. For Axis POWs who had never tasted it, the bottle symbolized American confidence, that a nation could ship its everyday comforts across oceans even in wartime. Psychologically, this mattered. The prisoners' environment stripped them of choice and self-determination, but the bottle introduced a small moment where a man could choose to drink or not drink, to believe it was medicine or experiment with it, to trade it, share it, or save it for later. Even that small autonomy felt like an anchor in a world otherwise controlled by guards and schedules. Rumors magnified the morale effect. Some believed the beverage boosted energy. Others claimed it lifted spirits or calmed nerves. A few said it cleared headaches. None of these effects were unique to Coca-Cola. They were the emotional interpretations of men starved for variety. Psychology in captivity is shaped by symbols, and for a brief moment, a Coca-Cola bottle became one, a symbol of a larger world still turning beyond the fences, a tiny challenge to the monotony that prisoners feared would swallow their identity. This morale effect sets the stage for the next layer of misunderstanding, the belief that the drink was not just uplifting but medically purposeful. Medicine in POW camps was defined by scarcity. Doctors, if present, worked with what little they had. Bandages were washed and reused. Antibiotics were nearly non-existent. For stomach illnesses, fevers, and infections, treatment often consisted of rest and whatever supplies guards allowed or could spare. Into this environment came a bottle filled with a dark, syrupy liquid that looked unlike any ordinary ration. For many prisoners, it strongly resembled medicinal tonics used in pre-war households. These tonics, often iron-rich, dark brown, and slightly sweet, were taken to stimulate appetite, ease digestion, or help with fatigue. Coca-Cola mirrored them visually and conceptually. But the strongest contributor to the medicine misconception was carbonation. To someone who had never encountered a fizzy drink, carbonation felt chemical. When the bottle was opened and the hiss of escaping gas filled the air, it seemed intentional, like the activation of a compound. The bubbles rising to the surface mimicked effervescent digestive tablets. When swallowed, the tingling sensation on the tongue tasted like disinfectant mixtures or herbal remedies used to soothe stomach ailments. Then there were the physiological effects. The combination of sugar and caffeine delivered a small but noticeable lift. In a malnourished body, even a short burst of energy felt like therapeutic relief. Men accustomed to weakness perceived the sensation as healing. Some believed the drink soothed nausea. Others thought it helped with headaches or chills. The placebo effect, amplified by camp conditions, was powerful enough to make the drink feel medicinal, even to those who doubted it. Medical misunderstanding was not naive. It was rational within context. In captivity, prisoners had learned that anything rare, bottled, and sweet tended to come from infirmary stores. When Coca-Cola appeared, they placed it in that category not out of confusion, but out of experience. That logic shifted once they observed how guards reacted to it, an influence that brings us to the final angle. The guards themselves played an unintended role in shaping prisoner interpretation. In some camps, German or Italian guards confiscated bottles for their own use, a practice prisoners interpreted as confirmation that the drink was valuable or potent. In others, guards dismissed it casually, treating it as a curiosity from American supply lines, reinforcing the idea that it must be functional rather than enjoyable. Japanese guards in the Pacific, unfamiliar with Coca-Cola themselves, occasionally issued it as part of medical rations, or distributed it to prisoners recovering from illness. This accidental reinforcement cemented the belief among many POWs that the beverage served a therapeutic purpose. Miscommunication further muddled understanding. Some guards attempted to explain the drink using broken phrases or gestures, but the cultural gap was too wide. Descriptions like American drink, tonic, or not medicine were easily misinterpreted, especially when filtered through multiple languages in the cramped space of a barracks. At times, prisoners watched guards study the bottle with equal confusion. This mutual unfamiliarity blurred the traditional dynamic of captor and captive. For a moment, both were observers of the same foreign artifact, each interpreting it according to his own assumptions. The result was a mosaic of meanings layered across cultures and experiences. Coca-Cola became many things simultaneously: a tonic, a stimulant, a curiosity, a luxury, and a symbol of the United States' industrial reach. All these angles set the stage for a pivotal moment, the first camp-wide encounter with Coca-Cola that would transform rumor into revelation and misunderstanding into a defining memory of captivity. The turning point came quietly, as such moments often do in wartime, not with a dramatic announcement, but with the mundane sound of wooden crates being unloaded near the administrative hut. It was early 1944. Snow had begun to melt into soft gray slush, and the camp smelled of damp earth and smoke from low-quality coal. Prisoners gathered instinctively, drawn by the sight of supply deliveries that always carried a mixture of hope and anxiety. This time, the guards seemed unusually indifferent. They lifted a crate with familiar red markings, placing it near the infirmary door, as if its contents were of little importance. A few prisoners recognized the script from earlier small deliveries: Coca-Cola. But this was not a handful of bottles. It was an entire shipment. Dozens of glass containers clinking as the crate settled onto the mud. Word spread rapidly through the camp. The Red Cross had sent medical supplies, someone said. Others whispered that the Americans had shipped stimulants for the wounded. Within an hour, speculation hardened into belief. This crate contained a medicinal ration, something meant to help the sick or ease malnutrition. The camp doctor, a captured British officer in his 40s, approached with curiosity. He had seen Coca-Cola before the war, but never expected to encounter it here. The guards thrust the crate toward him, indicating with brusque gestures that the contents were for prisoner distribution. Whether this was an act of compliance with Geneva Convention requirements or merely a disposal of surplus stock remained unclear, but the effect was the same. The bottles were now in prisoner hands. Men crowded around as the doctor pried open the lid. Inside, rows of bottles gleamed beneath straw packing. Their surfaces were cold from the lingering winter air. Even the doctor hesitated, aware that if he simply declared it a soft drink, many would not believe him. Months of deprivation had reshaped the camp's understanding of value. A fizzy drink seemed implausible, too frivolous, too indulgent to exist in a place defined by scarcity. He handed out the first few bottles to the most malnourished prisoners in the infirmary, a gesture intended as kindness but interpreted as confirmation. The recipients held the bottles gingerly, like fragile medicines. Some tried small sips, closing their eyes as the carbonation stung their tongues. Others rationed it, 2 sips now, 2 sips later, just as they would with quinine. The doctor watched in silence, unsure whether to correct them or allow the moment of comfort to exist without explanation. Outside, anticipation intensified. A group of newly captured soldiers, unfamiliar with Western products, examined the bottles skeptically. One German POW asked whether it was iodine. Another wondered if it contained alcohol. A Japanese airman, captured months earlier in the Pacific and later transferred to Europe, studied the bubbles rising through the dark liquid and quietly announced that it was almost certainly a stomach remedy. The guards offered no clarification. Some laughed and shook their heads. Others appeared as uncertain as the prisoners. Coca-Cola had never been common in Germany before the war, and whatever had existed had long been replaced by ersatz substitutes. To many guards, the drink was as foreign as it was to the men behind the wire. Then came the moment that solidified the misunderstanding. A prisoner suffering from dysentery, weak, dehydrated, and barely able to stand, was given a bottle by a guard at the infirmary door. Whether the guard believed it would help or simply wanted to offer something, anything, remains unknown. But as the sick man drank, the other prisoners watched in silence. They saw the color return faintly to his face as the sugar and caffeine revived him. They saw him sit up straighter. They saw him speak with slightly more strength a few minutes later. To them, the effect was unmistakable. The drink restored energy. It eased discomfort. It revived a man who moments earlier had seemed barely conscious. Of course, physiologically, the effects were temporary, the natural result of sugar entering an exhausted body. But in the minds of men who had lived months without adequate nutrition or proper medical care, this moment carried the weight of proof. Rumors evolved instantly. It helps with fever. It's good for the stomach. It gives strength. It keeps you awake. Within an hour, the camp hummed with theories. Within a day, the belief had settled into near certainty. Coca-Cola was medicine, some kind of American restorative tonic given to soldiers and the sick. The doctor attempted to explain the truth later, but his words competed with the prisoner's lived experience, and the experience seemed more convincing than anything he could say. Survival had made men trust sensation over description, results over theory, and the results had felt tangible. That night, in the dim lantern glow of the barracks, men sat with their bottles, sipping slowly, trading impressions, and watching the bubbles rise as though observing something miraculous. The dark drink had become a rare moment of fascination, and in captivity, fascination itself could feel like healing, yet this moment was only the beginning. The true turning point would come when the entire camp learned the reality behind the bottle, a revelation that would reshape how prisoners saw the drink, the war, and the world beyond the wire. The morning after the crate was opened, the camp stirred with a sense of anticipation almost unheard of in captivity. Men woke earlier, moving with a touch more purpose, as though the bitter winter air had softened overnight. It was not hope for liberation. That remained distant, almost abstract. It was something smaller, more immediate, a lingering curiosity about the strange American medicine. By noon, nearly every bottle in the crate had been claimed, traded, or quietly stored beneath bedding. Some prisoners saved theirs to drink later, believing it would work best when illness struck. Others sipped sparingly throughout the day. careful not to exhaust its supposed restorative properties. A few had already finished theirs, savoring the rare sweetness and feeling momentarily guilty for consuming what others saw as treatment. But the misunderstanding could not last forever. The turning point unfolded in a way no one expected, through a Polish interpreter named Janek, who had once worked in a hotel kitchen before being conscripted. He had seen Coca-Cola during pre-war summers when American tourists visited Krakow. To him, the bottle was not mysterious at all. He had watched children drink it by the river. He remembered waiters opening bottles with an easy twist, pouring the fizzy liquid over ice. He knew exactly what it was, but for hours he had watched the others treat it like a remedy. He hesitated to speak, not because he feared being disbelieved, but because the belief brought comfort. In a place where almost everything was gray, the bottle had become a spark of wonder. It felt cruel to extinguish it. Yet the truth emerged naturally. Late that afternoon, a group of prisoners approached Janek after hearing that he could read English. They held out their bottles, asking him to translate the label. He looked at their expectant faces, their earnest questions, and finally gave a quiet, gentle explanation. "It's not medicine," he said. "It's a drink, a sweet one. Children buy it for a few cents in America." At first they laughed, assuming he was joking. The idea that such a luxury, sugar, fizz, flavor, was an everyday indulgence for American civilians seemed absurd. But Janek persisted, describing the long glass refrigerators filled with the bottles, the advertisements, the casual way tourists ordered it alongside lunch. His certainty slowly eroded their disbelief. The shift began as murmurs, spreading from bunk to bunk. "It's not a tonic. It's a soft drink. Americans drink it like water." When enough men repeated the idea, skepticism turned into stunned realization. The entire narrative, the medicinal myth, the theories about stimulants, the belief that it was a ration for the sick, collapsed under the weight of a new, almost incomprehensible truth. This was ordinary American life. This was what the United States considered normal enough to ship across half the world, even during war. A drink so sweet and abundant that soldiers consumed it between meals. A product so ubiquitous that its absence was more surprising than its presence. The psychological impact was profound. For some prisoners, the discovery sparked disbelief mixed with admiration. If America could supply its soldiers with recreational drinks while fighting on multiple continents, what did that say about its industrial strength, its economy, its ability to project power across oceans? Others felt a quiet despair. If the enemy's soldiers enjoyed such luxuries while they themselves struggled for basic calories, what chance did their nations truly have? The bottle became a symbol of disparity, a reminder that the war was not only fought with guns, but with factories, shipping fleets, and the abundance of a nation untouched by invasion. A few refused to believe it at all. They insisted it must have medicinal value, arguing that no ordinary drink would be shipped in glass in bulk during wartime. This resistance revealed not ignorance, but the emotional difficulty of accepting a truth that redefined the balance of the world beyond the wire. Meanwhile, the guards reacted with a mixture of amusement and discomfort. Some shrugged, confirming that it was indeed merely a soft drink. Others, equally unfamiliar with it, asked Janek questions themselves. A few guards seemed uneasy, sensing that the bottle might inadvertently undermine morale, not by harming prisoners, but by revealing the scale of American abundance. In several camps across Europe and the Pacific, guards quietly stopped distributing surplus Coke, worried that it might shape perceptions in ways they could not control. But the revelation could not be undone. The prisoners now saw the drink for what it was, a symbol of a world whose priorities seemed unimaginable inside the wire. A world where sweetness and comfort were so common that even soldiers at the front expected a bottle in their hands. And as this understanding spread, it changed something fundamental within the camp. It altered how men viewed their captors, their enemies, and the war itself. It reshaped conversations in the barracks, influenced trade and barter, and created a new kind of curiosity, not about the drink, but about the America behind it. The climax of misunderstanding had passed. What followed was reflection, and the beginning of a different kind of morale shift, one rooted not in rumor, but in revelation. Liberation, when it finally came to many camps in 1944 and 1945, arrived with a swirl of shock, relief, and disorientation. Prisoners emerged from behind the wire as thinner, older versions of themselves, carrying memories shaped as much by deprivation as by endurance. Yet among the recollections they shared with Allied officers, medics, and journalists, one story surfaced again and again in small, almost humorous fragments. The day they first tasted Coca-Cola. For many, it became a symbol of the strange collisions created by global war, moments when industrial abundance met extreme scarcity in unexpected ways. American soldiers, hearing these stories from newly freed POWs, often laughed in disbelief. They could not imagine a world where Coca-Cola was unknown. But the laughter carried a softness, an understanding that wartime realities had created cultures within camps that bore little resemblance to civilian life. In debriefing sessions, some prisoners spoke about the drink with a kind of nostalgia, even reverence. A British sergeant recalled how the sweetness had momentarily transported him to memories of pre-war London bakeries. A German infantryman noted that the carbonation felt alive in his mouth, unlike anything he had tasted before. An Italian gunner described how he had saved half a bottle for 2 days, convinced it would help him recover from fever. A Japanese naval aviator, interviewed months later in a repatriation center, admitted that he believed the drink was an American stimulant for pilots because of the sudden clarity he felt after drinking it on an empty stomach. What united these accounts was not the beverage itself, but what it represented: a break in monotony, a moment of comfort, a window into a world untouched by captivity. In some cases, liberated POWs were astonished to see Coca-Cola sold casually in shops near their processing camps. They stood outside cafes or street vendors, watching bottles being opened with the same ease they had once associated with medicine. The realization was often jarring. The drink that had sparked so much speculation inside the wire was, in truth, part of ordinary civilian life in the countries now liberating them. For American servicemen stationed near former POW camps, the story traveled fast. Many began offering bottles of Coca-Cola freely to newly freed prisoners, amused by the idea that anyone had mistaken it for medicine. But for the POWs, the gesture carried deeper meaning. It was an offering of normalcy, a reassurance that they were stepping back into a world where scarcity did not define daily existence. In several memoirs, former prisoners reflected on how the incident shaped their early impressions of the United States. Some saw it as proof of American abundance, evidence that the nation had mobilized its industry with astonishing breadth. Others interpreted it as a symbol of a different kind of power, the power of culture, of consumer goods, of a society that believed comfort was part of morale. The idea that American soldiers fought while drinking something sweet and fizzy felt almost unreal to men who had survived months of deprivation. In the historical record, the Coca-Cola misunderstanding stands out not because it was dramatic, but because it was deeply human. It captured the contrast between two realities, a world of industrial excess and a world of enforced scarcity. It revealed how prisoners created meaning from whatever entered their limited environment, and it showed how even the smallest objects could become symbols of hope, misunderstanding, or quiet joy. And as the post-war years unfolded, that small moment inside the wire would take on new meaning, not only for the men who misidentified Coca-Cola, but for the nations reshaped by the war's end. In the years following the war, Coca-Cola's presence expanded across continents with remarkable speed. Europe, devastated by conflict yet hungry for renewal, became fertile ground for American products that symbolized modernity, abundance, and a return to normal life. Factories rebuilt from rubble erected new bottling plants alongside them. Distribution networks that had once followed armies now trailed reconstruction crews, diplomats, and new cultural exchanges. For many former POWs, the post-war encounter with Coca-Cola was unexpectedly emotional. Some saw it first in occupied zones, where American troops mingled with locals. Others found it in shops as economies stabilized. The first civilian sip often brought a strange mixture of familiarity and distance, a reminder of captivity, but also of the moment during captivity when something unusually sweet crossed the wire. It was a memory tied not to the beverage itself, but to the conditions under which they first tasted it. German veterans in particular wrote about this dissonance. A few recalled standing in post-war Berlin, watching American soldiers open bottles casually as rubble still lined the streets. Those who had once mistaken the drink for medicine now saw it as a symbol of a world that had continued moving, while their own lives had been held in stasis behind barbed wire. For them, the bottle became a reminder of contrasts. The contrast between scarcity and abundance, between wartime deprivation and post-war consumer culture. In Japan, the post-war arrival of Coca-Cola became part of a broader cultural shift. Occupation forces introduced the drink widely, and its presence in shops and vending stalls quickly became synonymous with American influence. Former Japanese POWs who had first encountered the drink in captivity witnessed it transform into a national curiosity, then a mainstream product. The confusion it once caused became a private memory, overshadowed by the rapid westernization of post-war Japanese society. As global trade normalized, Coca-Cola's image evolved from an American comfort to a symbol of globalization itself. In many ways, the misunderstanding inside POW camps foreshadowed this transition. The drink's wartime journey, from U.S. bottling plants to forward bases, from Red Cross parcels to prisoner hands, demonstrated how deeply intertwined cultural exchange and industrial logistics had become. Even accidental encounters, like those in the camps, carried cultural weight. Historians studying prisoner testimonies note that the Coca-Cola incident reveals more than just a curious misunderstanding. It illustrates how culture is perceived under extreme isolation. A soft drink became a mirror reflecting prisoners' needs, assumptions, and the frameworks through which they interpreted anything unfamiliar. It became medicine because the men needed medicine. It became a tonic because they lacked tonics. It became a symbol of American power because it arrived from a nation whose industrial capacity seemed limitless. Post-war veterans sometimes joked about the confusion, but beneath the humor rested a quieter truth. The drink had represented a brief escape, a moment of sweetness in a world defined by deprivation. It had been something to talk about, to trade, to share. A spark of novelty that cut through monotony. In that sense, Coca-Cola's role in POW culture was less about misunderstanding and more about relief. And as former prisoners rebuilt their lives, raised families, and entered peacetime careers, the memory endured, not as a dramatic event, but as a small, this strange intersection between global conflict and ordinary life. A moment where the industrial world brushed against the enclosed world of captivity. By the 1950s and 60s, as Coca-Cola billboards spread across cities from Frankfurt to Tokyo, former POWs sometimes told their children stories about the war. Among tales of hardship and endurance, one memory always drew laughter. The day they drank Coca-Cola for the first time, carefully, cautiously, believing they were swallowing medicine, unaware that they were tasting the future of global consumer culture. And that irony, both poignant and light, leads naturally into the deeper meaning of this story, a meaning that extends beyond bottles and camps, into the human experience of war itself. In the long shadow cast by the Second World War, it is often the grand movements of armies and nations that dominate memory, but the human experience of conflict is also shaped by moments so small they seem almost trivial. A sip of something sweet, a misunderstanding born from deprivation, a brief reminder of life beyond the wire. The Coca-Cola incident endures not because it altered the course of the war, but because it revealed something timeless about people living under extraordinary pressure. Inside the camps, men interpreted the world through hunger, fatigue, and longing. Their senses were tuned not to comfort, but to survival. When an unfamiliar object appeared in that world, they gave it meaning drawn from their needs. A drink became a tonic, sweetness became medicine. Carbonation became a chemical mystery. In truth, they were not misled. They were human beings seeking sense in a place where logic often felt suspended. And beyond those fences, the world that produced the bottle was changing in ways they could not yet see. The same industrial power that delivered food, fuel, and machinery to distant battlefields would soon deliver consumer goods across continents. The same logistics that moved soldiers would later move ideas, tastes, and culture. Coca-Cola was not just a symbol of America. It was a symbol of the modern age emerging from the ruins of war. For former POWs, the memory of that first bottle lingered long after peace returned. It reminded them of the strangeness of captivity, the fragility of normalcy, and the quiet resilience that allowed men to find meaning in the smallest fragments of daily life. It was a story they could share without bitterness, a reminder that even in the harshest conditions, humanity searches instinctively for hope, comfort, and connection. And so, the tale of POWs sipping Coca-Cola, cautiously, curiously, believing it to be medicine, becomes more than a curious wartime anecdote. It becomes a reflection on the distance between worlds and on the unexpected ways those worlds collided in a century defined by conflict and transformation. In that collision lies the quiet, enduring truth of this story, that even in war, humanity pays attention to the small things, because sometimes they are all that remain.